They say the city cracked before it fell, not all at once, but like a dish on the edge of a sink. First the sound, then the silence, then the fall. It was September 17th, 1942, and Stalingrad was screaming. I remember the exact hour because my pocket watch, stopped at 10:22, was in my coat when the roof of the station caved in. I was lucky. Most of the others weren't. I live now in what used to be the boiler room beneath House of Specialists, a fine name for a place full of rats and cold. We're 6 in here. There's old Tamara, who still insists on combing her hair even when it's falling out from hunger. There's Savali and Masha, a married couple who argue about everything, even the silence. There's a boy, Nikolai, whose parents vanished when the department store was bombed. And then there's Irina. Irina has a laugh like broken glass, not because she's unkind, but because that's what laughter sounds like in Stalingrad. She was a nurse. Now she sews buttons back onto jackets with surgical precision. She tells stories when we can't sleep. Not happy ones, but just enough to distract us from the stomach. That's worth more than bread. I used to be a tram conductor. Ran line number 5 down Red October Street before the bombs split the rails. I liked the rhythm of it. Ding the bell, open the doors, nod at the same grumbling pensioners. The Germans had already bombed the tram depot by the river. The skeletons of trams still sit there, twisted metal bones, orange with rust and ash. I dream about them sometimes. The city keeps trying to run, but there's no power, no lines, no one to ring the bell. They dropped bombs in waves. Luftwaffe raids on August 23rd turned the city into a firestorm. We watched the Volga boil. People ran from the embankment with their skin blistering like paper. I was pulling a girl, maybe 8 or 9, from under a streetcar when the heat rolled in. Her hair was already gone. She couldn't cry, just opened her mouth, and nothing came out. That night, we didn't speak. The fire lit the clouds. It was bright enough to see faces down in the shelter, pale as moonlight, with coal for eyes. In the morning, we looked for food. Everyone did. We tried the bakery near Workers' Street. It was gone. Just a black hole. I still remember the smell. Ash and bread crust. I used to be afraid of things like death or fire. Now I'm afraid of the rumbling silence, when you know something's coming and no one wants to say it. Or worse, the Volga wind, when it carries the sound of shouting across the frozen water, and you can't tell if it's German or Russian. They say the 14th Panzer Division reached the southern outskirts on the 15th. That's when we knew we were trapped. You could hear the tanks chewing glass under their treads. That first shell that hit the grain elevator, I felt it in my teeth. The grain burned for days, smouldering like it wanted to feed us, but couldn't. The Germans tried to drop leaflets. You will starve. You will freeze. Surrender. Masha used one to patch a hole in her boot. Irina used one to light a fire. I used one to wrap the last bit of sugar we had. I guess they were useful after all. We don't talk about the dead out loud anymore. There are too many, and you start to forget who you're remembering. We talk in gestures, in shared looks. Savely leaves scraps on the steps for the dogs, even though they're all gone. I saw him crying once. He said the wind got in his eye. This city, it's not a city anymore. It's stone and hunger and cold and will. We're not survivors. We're sediment, layers of who we were, pressed down by falling roofs and broken memories. But still, the cracked city holds. Maybe because it has no choice, and neither do we. Before the bombs, there were birds. I used to feed them outside the tram station in the mornings. Starlings mostly. Fat little tyrants that bullied the pigeons off the bench. I kept breadcrumbs in a tin box from my mother, and if I got there early enough, they'd be waiting. That was life then. Small routines wrapped around a city that felt like it would never die. This was 1940, a lifetime ago. Stalingrad was loud, humming with smoke and shouts, not from chaos, but from work. Factory sirens, engines clattering, schoolboys yelling in the alleys. You couldn't walk 10 minutes without hearing some kind of hammer or wheel turning. The city never stopped building. I lived in the Voroshilovsky district, a little two-room flat with a stove that always smoked and a balcony too small to be useful. It didn't matter. I had Vera, my wife. She loved flowers, but the soil was too thin. She grew weeds and called them rebels. Every morning she'd open the window and talk to them like they were neighbors. She worked at a textile plant. We met during the floods in '35, passing out sandbags. She called me a clumsy idiot when I dropped one on her foot. I told her that was how I proposed. She didn't laugh until weeks later, but after that, she never stopped. We had no children. Tried, yes, but the war stole that chance before it even began. That was the other storm, the slow one. June 22nd, 1941, the day Hitler invaded. I remember because Vera dropped a glass when the radio said the words. It didn't shatter, just cracked. We looked at each other for a long time, and then she said, "So, it begins." The factories changed overnight. Posters went up. Volunteers flooded the recruitment offices. I stayed. I told myself it was because someone needed to keep the trams running. Truth was, I was afraid. Not just of dying, but of not being needed. But Vera wasn't like me. She signed up to help with the medical train teams. Said her hands were steady, and her nerves were quieter than mine. She'd come home with dirt under her nails, and stories of shattered boys with perfect smiles. They still smile, she told me, even when their legs are gone. She was transferred to a mobile aid station by Kalach-on-Don in July of 1942. I begged her not to go. I told her the lines were collapsing, that the Germans were moving too fast, that she didn't owe anyone that kind of bravery. She kissed me on the nose and said, "Someone's got to be foolish enough to try." That was the last time I saw her. The letters stopped after August 19th. The same day the Wehrmacht began to shell the outskirts of Stalingrad. The same day the trains stopped. I went to the station every morning anyway, as if sheer habit might conjure her from smoke. Instead, I found silence. The pigeons were gone. So were the starlings. I waited outside for days after the bombing began, helping old men haul bricks away from tracks, helping women search the hospital lists for familiar names. The station itself was hit twice. The roof sagged like a dying lung. Then the water stopped running, and the lines at the bread depot began stretching into days, not hours. I remember the smell of gas, the hiss of boiling milk on the stove, Vera's shadow on the wall when she danced to old records we couldn't afford. I remember her laugh, the way she tucked her hands under her chin when she was proud of something. These are the things that come to me now, instead of sleep. The storm was already here. We just didn't see it. You want to know the cruelest part? The city looked most beautiful right before it broke. The leaves had just turned. The sky stayed soft and gold in the evenings. You could hear children playing across courtyards that no longer exist. We still believed we were part of something eternal. We were. just not the part we thought. The first time the Volga caught fire, we thought the world was ending. It was August 23rd, 1942, a date I'll never forget, not because it was the day the Germans arrived in force, but because it was the first time I saw water burn. The Luftwaffe came in waves, 200 bombers, maybe more. They didn't come all at once like we'd feared. No, they came in rhythm, like breathing, like some kind of monstrous lullaby. Every time you thought they were done, the ground shook again. The sky turned black and orange. Ash rained down like snow. Every wooden roof, every tramline cable, every dry route, it all caught fire. And when the oil tanks near the river exploded, the flames rolled across the Volga like a second sun. There were people on the banks, thousands, women, children, old men, evacuees waiting to cross to the far side. Some were on barges when the airstrike hit. I heard the screaming for hours. It echoed off the water and off the stone walls of the grain elevator behind us. There was no shelter left. Even the earth seemed to recoil. I tried to help. I don't remember much, just images. A man pulling a burning woman from the water. A boy sitting beside a severed arm, blinking. A priest blessing a pile of bodies as calmly as if he were watering flowers. At one point, I thought I heard Vera's voice through the smoke. I ran toward it, tearing open my lungs in the firelight. But it was just wind through a broken pipe. I collapsed on my knees beside a smoldering tramcar and vomited into the snowless ash. They say 40,000 civilians died that day. I believe it. Most of them never had a chance. The air smelled like metal and old bread. It's strange what you notice when your city is dying. I remember how quiet it was between bombs. Not real silence. No, that didn't exist anymore. But a kind of stillness. Like the city was holding its breath, waiting to see if it would be allowed to continue existing. I found shelter with others near the basement of a half-destroyed school on Dzerzhinsky Street. That's where I first met Savely and Masha. They were arguing about something stupid, whether it was better to boil rat meat or roast it. I didn't say anything, just sat beside the wall and listened. Later that night, Irina came in, dragging a wounded soldier. He had shrapnel in his thigh and glass in his neck. She worked on him in the dark, using vodka and a sewing needle. She asked for help, and I held his hands. He didn't scream, just muttered a girl's name over and over. Lenochka, Lenochka. He died before dawn. That was the first night I couldn't sleep. Not because of grief, but because the ceiling above us creaked every time the wind moved, and I kept imagining the floor above caving in. That was how people died now, randomly, silently, not from bullets or bombs, but from bad luck and concrete slabs. We started making lists of names, of useful items, of promises. Masha wrote down the names of the children we'd seen earlier that day. Tamara tried to remember the names of her cats. I tried to remember the last joke I'd told Vera. I couldn't. You don't talk much in the firelight. You just stare and breathe. Every movement feels selfish. Every crumb of bread feels like confession. I became something different that week. Not a man, not yet an animal either. Something in between. A shape of will, a silhouette of need. And always, the river burned. For days. Even when the flames died down, the smoke didn't. It got into your lungs, into your clothes, into your thoughts. We used to say, as long as the Volga runs, the city lives. That was the saying. But now I wonder, maybe it was the other way around. The cold didn't kill us. Not at first. It was the hunger. We'd grown used to the bombs, the smoke, the shattered bricks. But hunger is something else. It doesn't scream. It waits. It coils in your belly like wire, tightening until you forget what it was ever like to be full. By mid-October, the stores were gone. The bakeries had been burned or abandoned. The grain elevator was shelled into oblivion, then set on fire again just in case. Even the stray dogs vanished, some probably eaten, some smarter than us, and long gone. The ration cards became more valuable than rubles. The Soviet administration, what was left of it, issued them with mechanical discipline, but what you received depended on your station. Soldiers got 600 grams of bread per day. Workers, 400. Civilians, 250th. And that was on a good day. I was a civilian. So were most of us. They called it bread, but it wasn't. It was made of sawdust, flour scrapings, and something black that left grit between your teeth. You didn't chew it so much as dissolve it with hope. We lined up at dawn. At first, we had the strength to chat, joke even. Savely liked to say we were the true Russian aristocracy now, starving with posture. That got a laugh once. Only once. The bread lines stretched like rivers, winding through craters and rubble, past frozen corpses and walls still warm from bombing. People died in line, quietly, sometimes on their feet. Others would gently prop them against the wall so the line didn't have to shift. I once saw a woman collapse with her ration in her hand. A boy darted from nowhere and snatched it, gone before anyone could react. No one blamed him. The rules had changed. Hunger rewrites them all. Katya, the little girl Irina had unofficially adopted, began to cry when she smelled bacon from a soldier's billet nearby. She thought it was cake. Irina tried to smile and told her it was potato sugar, which didn't exist. But lies have calories sometimes. In November, I traded my coat lining for a tin of canned meat, Polish, pre-war, dented. I opened it with a nail and spooned out the contents like treasure. It tasted like metal and glory. I shared it with the others. Tamara wept after the first bite. And then there was Zhenya, a woman who used to be a piano teacher. She offered lessons in exchange for food. No one had pianos, but she kept offering. One day, she sat in the middle of the cratered square and tapped her fingers against her thighs, humming a Chopin waltz. A little girl brought her a potato peel. I was one of the lucky ones. I still had all my fingers. Irina wrapped our feet each night in old bed sheets dipped in paraffin. "This is what they taught us in Finland," she said. "They didn't tell us we'd be doing it in our own streets." We tried to ration hope. Small things. A boiled pebble to trick the stomach. A broken bottle turned into a ladle. A joke told twice, just to make sure someone laughed. But there were darker things too. There were whispers of men selling meat that didn't come from animals, of children disappearing, of entire basements emptied overnight. I don't know how much of it was true. Maybe none. Maybe all. But I do know the hunger line wasn't just physical anymore. It cut through the middle of each of us. On one side, what we still were. On the other, what we were becoming. The only thing that held us together was shame. Shame for what we might do, and love for those we were willing to starve beside. I once found a single plum in a soldier's coat, abandoned on the banks of the Volga. I brought it back and split it 6 ways. Tamara licked the seed like it was an heirloom, and Katya smiled. Just for a second. It tasted like before. The first snow came early. Not that light, delicate snowfall we dreamed of in better years, the kind that made tram rails shine and balconies feel soft. No, this snow was cruel. It fell like ash, grey and heavy, and didn't melt. It coated the dead and the living alike. It was December 1942, and the cold was worse than anything I'd known. The kind of cold that splits your lips open while you sleep, that makes wood scream in the walls. We wrapped our hands in torn bedding and lit fires with books. Not that we had many books left. Pages burned fast and bitter. And still, the battle raged. There was no front line anymore. Stalingrad had swallowed it. The Germans controlled one block. We controlled the next. You could see enemy helmets through the cracks in a wall. You could hear them breathing in basements under your feet. A single shell could erase a whole neighborhood, or just shake the walls and leave your ears ringing like a bell struck inside your skull. By now, we weren't civilians. Not really. We were survivors of something between war and decay. The official Soviet command still counted us as non-combatants. But in truth, we were part of the city's flesh now. The city bled through us. One morning, I saw Irina throw a bottle of iodine at a German soldier who'd stumbled through a blown-open door. He'd been separated from his unit. He looked more confused than afraid. Didn't even raise his rifle. Just stared as the iodine burst on his chest, staining his coat like a wound. We never saw him again. Another time, Savily helped a Red Army sniper position herself in the attic. She stayed for 3 days, using a hole in the brick as a sight line. She didn't speak to any of us, just nodded once when she left. That night, we heard German voices in the street, calling for help. And then silence. The bombing never really stopped, but it became background music. Distant thumps, then sudden screams, then quiet again. The city had a rhythm to it, death by beat. We learned not to flinch. You flinch, you waste energy. And energy was gold. By mid-December, the Germans were burning their own dead for heat. We could smell it in the air, thick and oily. Our fire, by contrast, came from broken chairs, floorboards, or old Soviet posters. I once burned a picture of Stalin holding a wheat bundle. Tamara said that was treason. I told her cold doesn't care about ideology. We drank melted snow when we could. We strained it through cloth to keep the ash out. It still tasted like ruins. I remember one night clearly. Katya woke up crying. Nightmares again. Said she dreamed the river was gone and we were falling through the mud. I held her against my chest, though I was colder than stone. Irina sang something soft in a language I didn't recognize. Maybe it was a lullaby. Maybe it was just humming. But Katya stopped crying. Outside, the street was glowing. Not from moonlight, but from a house 2 buildings down, on fire. The snow around it glowed orange and black, shadows stretching into grotesque shapes. A figure ran from the house, covered in flames. I didn't look away. I wanted to, but I didn't. We stayed that way for hours, watching the snow catch fire, one flake at a time. And in the morning, the frost returned like nothing had happened. In those days, you became part of the city's silence. You didn't speak unless necessary. Words had weight, and we were all too thin to carry them. But there was one moment, one I remember. Savily brought in a harmonica he'd found. Broken reed, but it still made sound. That night, as the wind howled and somewhere a building collapsed, he played a few notes. Nothing fancy. Just enough to make us remember music, to remember motion, to remember that fire can also be warm, even in the snow. We didn't hear it at first, just the distant thunder of artillery to the north, like always. It was November 19th, 1942. I remember the date because Irina scratched it into the wall with a broken fork. She said, "Something's changed." I didn't understand what she meant, but then, over the course of a few days, the air itself changed. There was silence, not peace, not rest, just a heavy quiet where the usual German shelling should have been, and in its place, Russian fire, coming from outside the city, not within. Then someone whispered it through the pipes, the kind of rumor that moves faster than bullets. They're surrounded. At first, we didn't believe it. How could we? For months, they had pushed deeper into the city, hammering us like gods. They'd taken the central square, the tractor factory, even parts of the riverbank. Now we were supposed to believe they were trapped. But it was true. Operation Uranus, that was the name. Our Red Army had swept around from the steppe like a storm, breaking through the Romanian lines north and south. By November 23rd, they had closed the ring at Kalak. The Sixth Army, the mighty, disciplined Germans, were now prisoners, same as us. I wish I could say we cheered, that we danced in the streets, but most of us were too tired to lift our arms. Still, something did change. The bombing slowed, not stopped, but less precise. German planes began dropping supplies, crates of food, ammunition, blankets. Most fell short, some shattered on impact. I watched a starving dog chew through a parachute cord, trying to reach a biscuit tin. But it wasn't the planes we noticed most. It was the Germans themselves. Before, they moved like predators, confident, orderly, efficient. Now they staggered, they limped, they bled. A soldier passed through the alley near our shelter one day, alone. No rifle, just a rusted mess tin and a pair of ruined gloves. His face was grey with frostbite. He looked at us, me, Irina, Katya, the others, and for the first time, he didn't look like an enemy. He looked like one of us. Someone broken. Someone hollowed. He didn't speak. He just nodded and kept walking, like a ghost. Later, we heard the rumors. That the Germans were eating horse meat. That some had even turned to cannibalism. We didn't flinch. We understood. Hunger makes monsters of everyone. Still, we watched as they dug trenches not for defense, but to bury their dead. Watched as they bartered cigarettes for crusts of bread with Soviet prisoners who had nothing themselves. Watched as their boots gave out and some wrapped their feet in torn pages from their own manuals. Some of us felt pity, others hatred. Most felt nothing at all. We had seen too much. Savelli said it best. They invaded a graveyard, and now they live in it too. The Red Army grew bolder. You could hear them calling across alleys at night, sometimes taunting, sometimes just talking. "How's the sausage, Fritz?" one voice called. Another answered in Russian, perfect and bitter. "Colder than your mother's love." We laughed, not because it was funny, but because it reminded us we weren't the only ones left with a voice. And yet, life didn't get easier for us. No one came with food or medicine. The encirclement was for strategy, not mercy. We still burned whatever we could find, still scraped the bottoms of tins, still watched Katya waste away slowly, even as she smiled. But now, we weren't only the hunted. The Germans started digging in, like rats, and we, the forgotten civilians in the cracks, began to move above them like smoke. I found myself walking into buildings I wouldn't have dared step near before. Looting, maybe. Foraging, if that sounds kinder. I found a blanket in a collapsed canteen, half a bottle of schnapps in a ruined officer's quarters, a pair of women's boots that Irina cut apart to make mittens for Katya. Once, in the ruins of a library, I found a book with a German name in the front. A boy's book, fairy tales. I read it to Katya in broken syllables. She didn't understand the language, but she liked the sound of it. Said the words made the cold feel further away. I didn't know what I felt. It wasn't justice, and it wasn't joy. It was something colder, heavier. Maybe it was survival. Maybe it was the knowledge that in this city of death, no one gets to choose what role they play forever. And as winter deepened, so did the silence. We were all waiting for the next crack in the ice. The end didn't come like a final blow. It came like rot, slow, cold, and quiet. The kind that spreads in the beams of your home, behind the walls, under your feet, until one morning everything just gives way. By January 1943, the German lines inside the city were buckling. You could feel it in the ground, less shelling, more screaming, fewer patrols, more begging. Their uniforms no longer matched. Some wore Soviet coats turned inside out, or draped themselves in blankets stitched from curtains. They were falling apart, and so were we. There was no electricity, of course, no running water, nothing but melted snow, rat meat, and what remained of barter. Irina hadn't spoken in 2 days. Katya's cough had turned dry and sharp, like branches snapping in the dark. Savely had stopped getting up altogether. He just stared at the ceiling, whispering numbers. Tamara died on the 7th. We think it was the cold, but who knows? I wrapped her body in what we had left of the bedding and dragged her to a nearby crater that was already half filled with corpses. She'd once asked to be buried with dignity. I whispered an apology when I let her go. I didn't cry. That part of me had frozen weeks ago. Out in the city, the snow was red, not from poetry, but from truth. Blood mixed with mud at every intersection. You couldn't tell who was Russian or German anymore unless you looked at the boots, if there were any boots. I watched a German boy, no older than Katya, limp through the rubble, dragging a stick behind him like it was a rifle. He stopped near what had once been a fountain and collapsed without making a sound. I went to him. He was still breathing. I gave him half a biscuit I'd been saving. He looked at me like I was a ghost, then whispered something in a language I couldn't understand. He died 10 minutes later. I buried him with my bare hands. The Red Army was tightening the noose. We heard it in the distance, the thunder of Katyusha rockets, the crack of rifles in frozen stairwells. Whole buildings were being cleared room by room, street by street. You'd think we would rejoice, but we didn't. We were afraid, not of them, but of what we were now. In our basement shelter, things had changed. Masha tried to take Katya's coat one night. Irina stopped her, not with words, with a brick. Savely said nothing, just closed his eyes and muttered again. I caught myself later, staring at Katya's rations, a crust of bread, smaller than my fist. My stomach tightened. My hands twitched. I turned away and beat my own head against the wall until the thought passed. That was what it meant now, to remain human, to resist the flicker of hunger when it told you to become something else. By January 26th, the Germans had been split in half. The Red Army had taken Mamiev Kurgan and severed the central pocket. The Sixth Army was bleeding out, and we, the survivors in the city's shadows, were watching death circle back on its masters. We heard the rumors. Field Marshal Paulus was trapped at department store number 1, dug in like a banker in a crumbling vault. That German officers were committing suicide rather than surrender. That the Luftwaffe couldn't fly anymore, and their wounded were freezing to death on stretchers. I believed every word. On the 31st of January, we heard shouting in the streets. Russian, loud, direct, the kind of voice that didn't echo anymore. Irina climbed up to a shattered window and came back down with her eyes wet. "They're here," she said. She was right. Red Army troops were pouring into the center. Some cheered. Some moved with cold, practiced urgency. Some looked at us, the gaunt, filthy ghosts that remained, and said nothing. They didn't know what to do with us. We weren't civilians anymore. We weren't soldiers. We were witnesses and reminders. I don't remember what I said when I first saw them. Maybe nothing. Maybe I just nodded, the way I did to passengers stepping onto my tram a lifetime ago. The war didn't end that day, but in Stalingrad, something did. They say the Battle of Stalingrad ended on February 2nd, 1943. I suppose that's true in the way newspapers need dates. But for those of us still breathing in the ruins, there was no single moment when it felt finished. The guns didn't stop at once. The silence didn't return all at once. Even the snow kept falling with the same dull weight it always had. But something had changed, and we felt it. No more German shouting, no more boots in the alleys, no more planes overhead. Just the slow, staggering arrival of our own army. Not a conquering force, but men with frost-bitten cheeks and shaking hands, stepping over wreckage they could barely recognize. Some looked at us like we were miracles. Others, like we were already dead. We buried the last of our group in those final days. Savely didn't wake up one morning. We wrapped him in a tarp and laid him beneath the wall of what used to be a tobacco shop. Irina kissed his forehead. Masha didn't say a word. I think she'd stopped speaking weeks ago. Katya lived. She was so thin by then, her hands like twigs, her skin nearly translucent. But she smiled when I told her the battle was over. "Does that mean breakfast comes back?" she asked. I laughed, a real laugh. Then I cried for a long time. No one knew what to do with us. The authorities were overwhelmed. Medical aid, yes, eventually. Food, a trickle at first. The city was a grave. Clearing it would take years. Rebuilding, decades. And the dead, well, they would never leave. We stayed in our shelter a little longer. Not because we had to, but because we didn't know where else to go. The thought of walls that weren't broken made me anxious. The idea of silence without bombs felt unnatural. I had become a creature of echoes. One day, I walked to the riverbank. The Volga was still frozen, but the wind had changed. It didn't bite as sharply. It carried something unfamiliar, the sound of hammering, of rebuilding, of the living trying, impossibly, to push forward. I stood there for a long time. In the ice, I saw my reflection, but not the face I remembered, not the conductor, not the husband, not even the man who had staggered through the fire and hunger, just a shape that had refused to vanish. Vera never came back. I like to believe she died helping someone, that her last breath was spent on something kind. I picture her holding a hand, whispering comfort in that gentle way she had. I have no grave to visit, so I visit the river instead. It carried her away, in one form or another. Irina eventually left the city. She took Katya with her to Kazan, I think. Said she had family there. She didn't say goodbye. Just left a note scratched onto the wall with a piece of coal. She deserves green things. I heard later that Masha remarried, built a new life, far from the rubble. I hope it's true. Me? I stayed. The tram lines are gone, of course, but I walk the routes in my head. Red October Street, Soviet Square, across the hill near the grain elevator. I nod to the ghosts. Some nod back. Sometimes school children come by to ask questions. They want stories. They want heroes. I give them truth instead. I tell them that war is not banners and speeches. It is hunger. It is losing your name in the dark. It is standing in line for bread that never arrives, holding the hand of a child and hoping she forgets what death smells like. I tell them that cities do not fall all at once. They fall in pieces, with every unmarked grave, every burned letter, every silence that stretches too long. But I also tell them this: we lived. Somehow, impossibly, through fire and snow, through grief and fear, we lived. And that too matters, even if no one remembers our names.